Welcome to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We want to encourage, equip, and connect those with a passion to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Student ministry can be a lonely place. You might even feel like you're the only one in your church or community that cares about students. Well, know this, you're not alone. People all across the country are engaging Gen Z and care deeply about the spiritual direction of these young men and women. Whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, if you have a heart for students, this is the place for you.
Welcome back to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. I'm Dan Carson, and I'm thrilled that you've chosen to download and listen as we continue the conversation about student ministry. Now, in today's podcast, we're going to talk about encouraging our students to share their faith with Chris Selby, and I'll be introducing him in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing and just helping spread the word about our podcast. Over the last several weeks, we've experienced a large growth, and man, it is exciting to see what God is doing with our little podcast. Another place that God is doing big things is at Central Baptist College of Conway. CBC is our podcast partner, and we are so excited for that partnership. CBC is challenging, engaging, and inspiring. And if your student is looking for a place for them to study a wide range of topics and to take that next step in their educational journey, CBC may be the place for them. They're going to learn about Jesus. They're going to spend time with professors and instructors that truly care about them. Let me encourage you to have your students reach out to cbc.edu. They could set up a visit. They can get involved in one of their Stampede Days, which is an opportunity to learn about Central Baptist College and the Mighty Mustangs. Or they can just simply call and set up a virtual visit. It is a fantastic place, and we'd love to see your students get involved there. Now, there is another side. Perhaps you're looking to finish a degree. They have what's called their PACE program. It's an opportunity for you to learn and for you to finish up a bachelor's degree through their program. So again, check them out at cbc.edu. Well, on today's podcast, we're sharing an interview that we had with Chris Selby. Chris is married to Susan and has 3 boys and a daughter-in-law. Their oldest son, Blake, just recently married Taylor. Their middle son, Andrew, is a freshman at John Brown University in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. And their youngest, Zane, is in the 8th grade at Lifeway Christian School in Centerton, Arkansas. Chris began Multiply Ministries 7 years ago and serves as an evangelist and missionary to ministry leaders. He loves equipping and encouraging ministry leaders to equip their people to live on mission for Jesus. He coaches around 30 youth leaders yearly and has spoken all over the country. We're excited that Chris was able to take a few minutes and join us, and we're happy to share this interview. Now, the recording quality wasn't quite up to the standards that we have, but I didn't want us to miss out on the content. So let's listen together. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Hey, glad to be here, Dan. Thanks for the invite.
Well, Chris, I'm thrilled that you're here. I know that we live in the same part of the world. In fact, many years we were a part of the same church camp, and so it's just a pleasure for us to connect in this way.
Yeah, man, it's exciting. I'm excited to be on here. Love what you're doing, man. Love what you're doing with this podcast.
Well, Chris, one of the things that we like to do is to get to know our guests a little bit better, especially for our listeners. We now have listeners all over the country and a lot of different places around the world. It's pretty exciting, but they don't know you like I do. And so tell us how you came to know Jesus.
Yeah, love to, man. It's interesting. I tell people I had a drug problem growing up. I was drugged to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday nights by my parents. But for some strange reason, I just didn't connect with Christ. Had many opportunities to. I just didn't growing up. And then at the age of 23, man, which is pretty cool because what I didn't know then, what I do know now is that my church growing up, Maysville Missionary Baptist Church, and my parents were praying for me all those years. And man, God just got a hold of me at age 23. I remember a Bible that my parents gave me when I was 16. And I went down to my I lived in Bella Vista, Arkansas at the time, went downstairs. I had this junk closet. Well, I don't know if everybody's got at least a junk drawer, right? I had a junk closet. So I'm pulling boxes out and looking for this Bible, and I find it, and man, I just turned to John 3:16, and man, I just started weeping, and just cried out to Jesus, said, I'd done some horrible things, and just begged him to forgive me and told him I wanted that eternal life, and he radically changed me that day. I remember, this is showing my age a little bit, but I remember getting on the computer. We had just gotten the internet, and it was dial-up, right? And it was AOL. Yeah. And, so I got on there and started telling people, I found Jesus. And they were like, you're crazy, man. But anyway, so that really started my journey of, just falling in love with him and learning about him. And he changed my life that day. And so that was 23. I'm 50 now. So I've been born again now for those 27 years, man, just loving life.
Well, 23 is still a young man, but at the same time, it's a little older than a lot of the people that I've talked with.
Yep.
So we're working and trying to help those that are working with teenagers.
Yes.
A lot of those guys are volunteers and different people.
Mm.
So, who invested in you during those teenage years? Maybe it was a coach, maybe it was somebody at church. Who was it?
Yeah, no. So my mom and dad were poured into me. My dad, he was the song leader at church. My mom played the piano. There was a guy, Stephen Rosetta, Selby's my parents, by the way. And there was a guy, our Sunday school teacher, called Jack Netherton. And man, he poured into us. I was best friends with his son, and just between those three, I would say. And then there were some pastors. Tommy Haley is one that was very influential in my life. Tom Netherton. And then going to camp every year. So, Dan Fagla was influential. Russell Jones, some of those guys that didn't even realize it probably had a lot of influence in my life. And I told them later on, Dan and Russell and those guys. But growing up, I would say definitely all those people had an influence in my life.
Well, and the consistency of just those people being there, being there for you, and being some of those get names that you mentioned of people that were there for me as well. And so it's just cool to see those lines intersect.
Right.
Well, before you began Multiplying Ministries, you served in the local church as a youth pastor. So a question I often ask our guests is, why student ministry?
Oh, man. I tell you, that's a great question. So when I started, I volunteered at anything, right? I remember Jack Netherton being one of those guys that asked me, hey, Vacation Bible School is coming up, and we have a slot for 4th and 5th graders. Can you do that? And at the time, I was like, there's no way I can do that. And he said, well, I'll make you a deal. This was Sunday morning, right, before Sunday school. He said, I'll make you a deal. If no one signs up by the end of tonight, Sunday night, would you do it? And I'm like, I guess, man. That Vacation Bible School started that next Monday. I said, I guess I will, and I did it. And even though there were 4th and 5th graders, man, I just loved it. Like, I loved every bit of it. And so after that, I tried children's church. That didn't work for me. And then I started volunteering with the youth group. And man, it just was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. I love this. And then the Lord kind of convicted me and showed me that he wanted me to help students not go through what I did, and to help them actually grow, not have to go through what I did, and get saved at an earlier life and be discipled at an earlier life. And so, that's kind of why youth ministry, man. I just fell in love with students, and could relate to them and wanted to help them. I could understand what they were going through a lot of times because of my own default, right? I went through a lot of those things myself. Right, and I wanted to help gear them the right way, so they didn't have to wait till they was 23 to start, be saved or start living for the Lord. So that's why youth ministry, man.
Well, what I love in that story is that those that were helping you along the way were giving you opportunity to try out some different things.
Yep.
And I don't think we do that enough with our students. We need to give them those opportunities.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think, I say all the time that students aren't just the church of tomorrow, they're the church of today.
Yeah.
And if they can learn algebra, and they can run state track meets and be in band and in the things that, man, they can learn memorize scripture. They can learn how to share their faith. They can live on mission for Jesus. We don't have to wait till they're in college or beyond to do that. So I agree.
Well, Chris, I know that over the years, I've always kind of connected you with Dare to Share. It's an important part, I think, of who you are and what you do. I think about that area of evangelism and sharing your faith. So why is evangelism so important to you?
Man, evangelism is so important to me, I think, because I remember the first time I did a devotional on a Wednesday night at Maysville, maybe a year, maybe not even that long after that Vacation Bible School. They asked me to do a devotional, and it scared me to death. But I did devotional, and not because of me, just because I have the gift of evangelism. All these students came forward, and I didn't know what to do, to be honest with you. I asked, I remember Raymond Scott was the pastor. My dad was still a deacon. I said, can you guys come help? Because I don't know what's going on right now. All these kids came forward wanting to be saved, and I honestly didn't know how to do that. I told them my story and told them how Jesus changed my life, but I could not take them through scriptures. But, the pastor and everybody else helped through that. And from that time on, I started begging God to show me how to share my faith. And so, man, that started me on this path of, first I found Ray Comfort, the whole, if you died today, where would you go? Then Greg Steer and different people in my life. So, man, I just found it very important for me to be able to share my faith relationally well, clearly. And so that in turn went to equipping my students how to share their faith, because I believe there's a lot of people who've never really heard the gospel. The whole gospel, I think there's a lot of people who've heard maybe, hey, Jesus loves you, or Jesus died for you, which is awesome, but can't actually vocalize the clear gospel in a regular conversation with their friends and family members.
Chris, that is kind of at the heart of it. We live in what many would consider the Bible Belt, but there are so many people around us that have never heard the gospel. They don't know really who Jesus is, other than maybe somebody that gets celebrated at Easter and Christmas, but that's it.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So man, my passion is to change that. Nationally, the numbers say 5 to 10% of all teenagers are affiliated with the church. And so you're talking about 90% at least of any school that's not. And so what better way? I call students that go to a public school federally funded missionaries, man. So the government's doing something right? And so, man, my passion is to equip them and send them to those schools to share with their friends. Because as you know, man, like depending on the stats, whoever you want to look at, 77 to 85% of people make a profession of faith before the age of 18.
Yeah.
So, man, we got to get them young.
We do. I mean, it is vital for us to do that. So do you have any other reasons why you would think that the subject of evangelism is so important as we deal and work with students?
Yeah, I mean, students, man, are hurting so bad today. I mean, I saw an article that said that the typical teenager today deals with as much stress as an adult did in the 50s and 60s.
Wow.
And so for me, I think, and it's good to have things in place to help them with that, counselors and things like that. But man, at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to really help them is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so they need help now. They need hope now. And we know that the only hope is Jesus. And so if they can hear that, then that's going to radically change their lives, obviously, forever. So they go through a lot, man. Suicide is up. Attempts is up. Depression is up. Everything is up. And so these students desperately need Jesus.
Let's get to the heart of the matter. What are some things that we can do to encourage our students to be more evangelistic?
Yeah, man, that's such a good question. I get that question so much. And the crazy thing is the answer, I think, is a pretty simple one. I think it starts with us in intercessory prayer, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Man, I remember, 12 years ago, maybe longer than that, Greg Steer, my good friend and mentor now, but I didn't know him then, looked up to him. He asked me a question because I told him I had apathetic students and hard time getting them to share their faith, but even be interested in anything that related to Jesus, And he asked me a simple question. He said, well, do you believe in the power of prayer? And I didn't look like, I didn't want to look like a moron. I was like, of course, I believe in the power of prayer. It's the most powerful, one of the most powerful things we have. It's so important. It's vital. And he said, well, when you meet on Wednesdays, do you spend more time in announcements or in prayer?
Mm.
And I was like, oh man, that hurts. And he said, good. If you know Greg, that's kind of his attitude. Good. But then he started talking to him about, what about your personal prayer life? Like, are you praying for your kids? And I'm like, man. And so I really wrestled with that, man, for a little while. And what I came to find out was what the Lord led me to do is start praying for every one of my kids by name every day and really crying out on their behalf, asking God to break their heart for their lost friends, but also to give them a hunger and a thirst for, for the Lord, and to help them see life different, and help me to see them different. And man, over about a month period, after about a month, I started seeing kids different. I started seeing it take effect. And so, man, for me, just praying for them on a daily basis, begging God to, interrupt their lives, really started changing the way our culture and our ministry at that time. And so I talk about all the time inspiring students to share their faith, or inspiring students to be about the things of the Lord Jesus. And for me, man, that first step is prayer. Like, honestly, not just for me, but then like getting the church to pray for them. Studies have shown that every student needs at least 3 pastor type mentors in their life to, not just one anymore, but up to 3 for their faith to become real for them and to stick after they graduate high school. Mm. And so one really cool thing, I think, just not the youth pastor inspired them, but then getting the church body to actually start praying for the youth in the church, I think is just an amazing way to do it too. So if you're praying for them, if you can get another adult volunteer praying for them, then someone in their church praying for them, that's at least 3. And hopefully if their parents are praying for them, that's 4 or 5 people that can really start praying for these students to become really, man, to see the world through Jesus' eyes, and for their heart to be broken for the lostness around them.
Let me ask, you brought up a question that Greg had for you. Said, how much time are you spending in your youth group service praying? So
yep.
What do you recommend for that? Let's, very practical answer to that is what we're looking for.
Yeah, man. So one thing we did, we taught them the acronym ACTS: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. And so we were I did a lesson on prayer, like a month series. We would put ACTS up on the board, and we would have them actually take we bought those 50-cent composition notebooks.
Yeah.
And we would we called those our prayer journals. And so we'd have students take those and literally write out from the board, what can you adore about God? Mm. We made sure, and we taught them that. We told them, these are things not that God's done for you, but what can you adore about him, about his holiness, his love, his justice, that he's all knowing, that he's all seeing, all those things. And then really go through C. We told them not to put their names on the book. This is all anonymous. And so they would confess sins on there. Be real with them. And then the T was thanksgiving, things that God's done for you. And the supplication is just request, And so what we would do is we'd have them write those out on that notebook. We'd take about 15 minutes to do it. They'd put the notebook back. And so I and the other adult volunteers actually go through those to actually see what our students are really going through. Mm. And so you're teaching them how to pray, but then you're seeing where they're at. And then the next week, or maybe every other week, we'd have them take a journal and pray over who did it last week, and then do your own. So that way people would actually open up, but you're teaching them how to pray. And we would encourage them, pray this like this at home. Pray like this every day. All you have to do is get a journal. You've got notebooks, and just start praying every single day in those. And so that way it became a habit. So we would do that in our ministry a lot, man, just to make prayer a priority. And then we would do that one week, and the next week we may break them up in groups and pray for their lost friends. And so we had a giant called a cause circle in our room, and we would have them pray for their lost friends and write those initials down on the board. And one week we would all get together, say if we had girls that were on the same volleyball team. Hey, get with your volleyball team if it's 2 or 3 and pray for every girl on your volleyball team. Pray for people on your drama team or whatever. And so we would break it up in different ways like that to keep prayer fresh, but we'd always use the same, acts so that way they could memorize something. Because one thing I learned in education, people know this is called Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive levels. And the way we learn, whether in seminary or preschool, is you have to memorize something first. And so we had to memorize that acronym, and then you have to understand it. Then you have to apply it. And so doing those 3 things over and over and over helped them actually learn how to pray. So not just when you meet, but then outside of the service itself.
So if you begin with prayer, personal prayer, have others praying for your students, and then you incorporate prayer into your youth group time, where their hearts are breaking from all different angles. I mean, that's what is happening. And so they see this great need. So what's next, though? We can't just stop there with a broken heart.
No. Right. So we always talked about care. So prayer, care, and share, right? And so how can you love on these? So let's say if you've got a 3 to 5 people in your cause circle, right? You're praying for these lost friends or family members, then you care for them. How can you care for them? Can you sit by with them at lunch? Can you, get them buy them a Sonic drink and bring it to them? Just be there, text them once a week, say, hey, how can I pray for you today? You're on my mind today. How's everything going? Just to show the love of Christ and be creative with it. We would keep track of, hey, have you cared for somebody in your call circle this week? And then maybe even find a list of their favorite candy and buying that candy once a week, whatever you can do to show them that you care. Because if you show them you care, then when they want to talk about stuff, then they're going to come to you most likely.
Yeah.
And then the last part was share, right? To share the gospel. And so we worked really hard on training and equipping our kids on how to go from a secular conversation to a spiritual conversation.
Okay.
So one of those ways is by asking great questions. So if you're on a school bus ride to a football game or in the band, right? And you've been praying for this person, you've been caring for this person, and we've all felt as believers, man, you feel this conviction from the Holy Spirit to talk about Jesus. Then as you're talking in a regular conversation, you say, hey, I was wondering, do you have any spiritual beliefs? Or what do you think about God? Or what do you think about church? Or what do you think about religion even? And so ask great questions. Jesus was the master of that, obviously. The woman at the well, great questions usually lead to great conversations, right? Like, do you have a drink? Can I have a drink of water? Is what Jesus asked the woman at the well, right?
Yeah.
And so just ask those great questions. Listen, I tell people all the time, if you ask that question and they say, I don't want to talk about it, then the conversation ends right there. But you haven't lost a friend. You haven't got punched in the face. It's very open. No one's going to be offended. And so it stops there. But if they say, well, I believe in this, or whatever question you use, like if they say, hey, I'm a Mormon or a Buddhist or a Wiccan or an atheist, the next question is, I would love to hear about that. Would you share that with me? I don't know what, don't assume you know what they believe by a book you've read or some training you've gone through. Actually ask them. And if they share that with you, I've never once been turned down to ask, because what happens is if you ask them and we tell kids to admire them, right? Put down your cell phone, look them in the eye and listen well to whatever they believe in. It doesn't matter. And try to find something to admire about their faith system. So even, if it's Mormons, Jehovah's Witness, man, I always tell them, man, I admire you are so serious about your faith and you go to church 6 days a week. Man, I admire your faithfulness to your faith system. And then when they're done, you ask permission to share. Thank you for sharing that with me. That's amazing. Can I share with you what my spiritual beliefs are, or what I think about God, or what I think about religion? Whatever the question you ask them, you follow up with, can I share with you?
That's good.
Never been turned down. Never been turned down by that. Atheists, agnostic, it doesn't matter because they've shared part of their soul with you, And then so we do that. And then we say, you admit that you're a wreck without Jesus. you share your story, you share your testimony, and then you share God's story, the gospel. So pretty simple, to navigate that. And then after that, 2 follow-up questions would be, does that make sense? And do you have any questions? And if they have questions about a talking point about how you shared the gospel, then answer that best you can. If you don't, say, honestly, I don't know, but I'll do some research and find out if we can continue to talk about this like next week or tomorrow or whatever. I've found that unbelievers really do appreciate you being honest with them if you don't know, instead of just trying to make something up. So, just be honest. I don't know, man. I'll find out, and then, so it's an ongoing conversation.
Right.
It's never, ever usually just one conversation. It's usually an ongoing one usually.
Well, I love what you've given us. You've given us a rather simple formula, but it's very powerful. Prayer, yes. And then this idea of caring, and then sharing, and being able to communicate some of those things to our students. So my question, which would be helpful for me as well as for those listening, is where can we find information? Is there a book kind of that can help us in this process?
Yeah. So there's a book called Gospelize that Greg Steer wrote. It's a great book. It talks about this stuff in detail. And then also there's resources out there from not just Dare Share, but there's a lot of different ministries. Bless Every Home uses Prayer Care Share. Crew uses Prayer Care Share. Dare Share uses Prayer Care Share. And it's simply a circle. And then, just pray, care, and share. But then there's also Dare Share is actually called the AAA method, with the ask great questions, admire them, and admit. So if you go to dareshare.org, then you can find those resources out there. Yeah. And they're available too. I've got all those resources that, you can just email me at either cselby72@gmail or Multiply Ministries 2020 at gmail.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely have some of those things in the show notes. I know that one of the things that I've loved about Dare to Share is that they do have some free resources that you can easily get from their website. And so we'll try to put a link on there. I know at different points, even in our bio, we have one of those link trees, and I've had a link to that stuff in there because it's great stuff and it's free. We're always looking for free, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, listen, Chris, I am so appreciative of you being on our podcast today and talking about this and encouraging us in this area, because so many of us fall short, whether we don't have the gift of evangelism. And so we have a tendency to pull back from it. And then it's hard to invest something in our students that we don't feel confident in. And so what would you recommend for us that maybe feel that way, that we're not confident in our own evangelistic efforts, but we know we have to be ready if our students are going to see the example side of it?
Yeah, man, that's so good. I tell you, that's one of the things we coach on a lot is leaders embrace and model it. And so my wife's an introvert, so I totally understand. I didn't until I married her, and I really do now. I think, man, that just praying for, really asking God to break your heart for people in your circles of influence. And then that way you're joining him in his mission. And then really learning how to care for your neighbors well, like inviting them over for dinner or having a barbecue for your neighborhood. Because it's harder. I mean, if we're honest, it's harder for us if we're in ministry to even know unbelievers.
It is.
So I think so that's the first step. Is I've been at different pastor conferences and people ask me that question. I'm like, well, if you live in a neighborhood, you can start prayer walking the streets, asking God to break your heart, have a barbecue with your neighbors. And if you don't have neighbors, and like I've known a lot of people that will join taekwondo or a gym or something with these eyes of God, where's the harvest field at? Where's my harvest field at? Where, break my heart for these people. And then just asking for opportunities and really praying and caring. And then honestly sharing, man, I still get scared. I still get butterflies on an airplane or with my neighbors or wherever I'm at. But 2 Corinthians 5:11 says, work hard to persuade others. And I think we just got to practice, honestly, like with our wives, with our children. We used to practice as a youth group on how to go, just having those gospel conversations, just asking those because the hardest part, I think, is starting that conversation. So by using that AAA method, by asking those great questions, because it's in us. And once we get the conversation started, it just all comes out, honestly.
Yeah.
And so I think, honestly, just number one, find lost people to be around, which can be the hardest thing. And then investing in those relationships, and then really going through the process of really praying and caring and sharing. Because once you get to know somebody, man, as you know, man, our heart's going to start to break for them. And we have all this information inside of us. I think just being intentional with it through the praying and the caring, and then practicing that, just starting out with asking those great questions, man. And it'll all just come up, I think, honestly.
That's good stuff, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Dan.
Now, I do want you to share with our listeners about Multiply Ministries.
Yeah, would love to, brother. So, Multiply Ministries was really birthed out of this, having a passion for students to be equipped to live on mission for Jesus through prayer and the word and relational evangelism, discipleship, multiplication. And so we coached about 30 youth pastors a year. And man, if you'd be interested in that, you can call me at 479-270-0127, or you can get me with my email, cselby72@gmail, or Multiply Ministries 2020@gmail for any information. But also, man, I love to equip students too as part of that, whether it's to share the gospel, whether it's a day or a weekend, adult volunteers. I love training whole youth groups or a bunch of different pastors on, just the basics of how to have a Great Commission focused ministry with some of the things we've talked about today. Yeah. So if I can serve anybody anyway, man, I would. And even listen, if you don't want to pay for coaching, you don't want to pay for me to come out and do that, just call me and I would love to talk to you. And I can, not that I'm smart, but I'm old and I've done it. I've been through it. And I would love to help you with anything possible, man. My job is like you, Dan, I'm a missionary to youth pastors. Yeah. And so if I can serve in any way, man, I would love to. I just love doing it, man. I love healthy leaders lead healthy students.
That's right.
And I know how hard it is, man. I've done it like you have. And sometimes you just don't know what to do because you're in the middle of it. And sometimes it's good to get an outside voice that can look at things going on around and just to be able to give some encouragement and prayer and advice sometimes. So.
Well, again, thank you, Chris, so much for sharing today, for being a part of our podcast. And just we'll be praying for you and your ministry as you do the same sort of work we do, which is invest in those that are seeking to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ.
Yes, sir.
Well, listeners, thank you so much for being here with us and joining us in this conversation. We'll be praying for you as you seek to impact that next generation, but also praying for you as you try to focus in on sharing your faith and helping your students do the same. Again, we do all these things because student ministry matters.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. Get connected at studentministrymatters.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Student Ministry Matters. Until next time, keep up the great work with your students because the work matters.